Your father now, he remains as a lecturer at Exeter, but I know at some point he moved to Jamaica.
Correct.
So when does this happen? When is your shift taking place now between?
So this is the second huge shift of my life. The first is from Edinburgh to Exeter, and from my granny's devoted household, where I am the center of the world, to a bustling household with a stepmother and all those children. My second great shift, it comes in 1963. My father got restless at Exeter. I'm not quite sure exactly why.
Remind me what kind of town Exeter would have been, because Edinburgh would be in Scotland, very nice.
Beautiful city. Exeter is a beautiful city too. Exeter is famous for a wonderful, beautiful cathedral. Right. A lot of old architecture. And then it became a university town. The reputation of the University of Exeter rose very rapidly, and it is certainly one of England's best universities. But Exeter was a small city. We lived in a suburb of a small city. A 10-minute walk took us into the country. And by the way, I should say that two things I did outside school was reading and walking. I was a great walker. I was never much for bicycles, but I was a great walker. And you were in the country, and beautiful Devon country, as I said, 10, 20-minute walk from our house. So we walked a great deal. I often walked alone. It was safe to do that back then, sometimes with Rachel. So in 1963, my father accepted an offer of appointment as professor and head of what was then called the Department of English at UWI Mona. He was actually persuaded by Sir Arthur Lewis, who was then Vice-Chancellor, to come. I should tell you, my father had achieved a considerable reputation from one particular book called The Shakespearean Moment, which was published, I cannot remember when, but somewhere in the mid-50s, and became a famous book. So he had a reputation as a scholar both of Shakespeare and of 17th century literature.
If I remember rightly, his name is Patrick Crotwell.
Good for you. You've got it. So anyway, he accepted this appointment at Mona. Now, I had just done A-levels. I did A-levels at 17. I had just done A-levels in 63. Whereas my older brother and my older sister both stayed in England and went to Cambridge, where they had been accepted. It was felt that I was too young and, let's be frank, too dopey to be allowed to stay in England and make...
Too dopey?
Too dopey. I was, you know the word fey? I was...
I wouldn't put you as fey.
You did not know me at 17. My stepmother particularly was convinced that I lived, my head was in the clouds. I lived in books. I was a bookish child and could not have coped with life on my own. She may have been right, I don't know. Anyway, the family decision was to put some pressure on me. I wasn't ordered, to put some pressure on me to come with the family and basically register to do a BA at UWI Mona. I didn't resist the pressure, I suppose partly because I was a quiet, obedient child and generally did what I was told to do, and partly I must have felt a certain sense of excitement. So we arrived, the family arrived, minus my older brother and sister, the family arrived at Mona just on the heels of Hurricane Flora, which after mashing up Tobago moved up and nearly mashed up Jamaica, but instead chose to move and go to Cuba instead, whereupon, this is absolutely true, religious people in Jamaica said it was because of communist Castro that Jamaica, Christian Jamaica was saved and communist Cuba was mashed up. So we arrived in September 1963 and I registered as a BA history student. On my father's insistence, and I give him great credit for his wisdom, I didn't live at home during those 3 years. Home, of course, was a college common house, a house in the compound, you would remember. I lived in Mary Seacole for the 3 years, which I think was very, very important.
Who was the warden then?
You know who it was,
right.
Lucille. Not that we would have even dreamt of calling her Lucille, of course. We held her in great respect, almost awe.
So this was 1960.
I was at Seacole between 63 and 66.
So Lucille had not yet written her famous...
We vaguely knew she was a graduate student, but she hadn't completed her thesis.
And you didn't know that she was writing or that she was doing work with Elsa Govaya?
Not a clue.
But Mary Seacole had a reputation of being a women's hall.
It wasn't all women's hall.
I know, it was, but it had a reputation of being a women's hall based on based on a woman who had contributed.
Absolutely.
Did this ever make a dent in your consciousness?
It must have. There was a large portrait of Mary Seacole in the dining room. Yeah, it must have, looking back. At the time, I don't think I knew about it. I have to tell you that the girls in Seacole had so much awe and respect for Lucille that we hardly ever actually spoke to her. The person we went to when we were in trouble was June Dolly Besson, who was then a subwarden, a lovely, nurturing, motherly person. So, as she then was, Mrs. Lucille Mayer was very much a figure we respected, but didn't particularly interact with, you know. But yes, it must have made a difference, and I was living with young women, most of them Jamaican, but of course some of them from the Eastern Caribbean and Guyana and so on. It must have, although it was quite a long time after that I really understood who Mary Seacole was and what she had done.
So Lucille had remained almost unapproachable in her own way.
Was
up
that
to
your
the very end.
That was your
Yes, I
impression?
mean, you understood her, but she kept that
She
aura.
had an aura, that's the word, she had an aura.
Yeah. And this is a very interesting decision because your father would have actually been living just across the road, and yet he decided you would live.
He did.
Was it partly because of your stepmother being?
That may have been in his head, but I think he also wanted me to make friends and become part of the undergraduate community,
And
which
less
would have
fee.
been and less fee, exactly, coping for yourself. Now I did of course go home often at weekends, and I think I took laundry home and that kind
I
of
wouldn't
stuff.
be surprised if you didn't.
Right. But I was definitely living at Seacole. And also I need to tell you that my father stayed only 2 years at Mona.
Okay.
He would have loved to have stayed longer, but my stepmother hated Jamaica almost from day one. And I imagine she must have put pressure on him. So he stayed for 2 years and then left and went to Kenyon College in Ohio. So for the last year of my undergraduate life, I was living at Seacole without the family at college.
Why did your stepmother hate Jamaica?
She said afterwards that she hated tropical countries, which of course begs the question, why did they agree to go to Jamaica in the first place? She felt isolated. She wasn't working. She didn't have a job. My baby sister, little Alice, was a baby, born early in 1963. So she was coping with a baby and 2 fairly young children. She felt isolated. English women, expatriate wives, didn't have a whole lot to do in those days. So there were those kinds of reasons. There may have been other reasons. The marriage, I think, was beginning to deteriorate. My father and my stepmother did break up not very long after they left Jamaica. So there may have been those difficulties, which, of course, I knew very little about at that time.
So you were living in Mary Seacole, doing a BA in literature?
No, in history.
In history, sorry. What was that like? What was who taught you? What were you introduced to as a...
Right. In deciding what should be, we didn't say majors in those days, we had special honors. And so in deciding what should be my special honors subject, it was clearly between English and history, the 2 subjects that I had done well in A-level and liked best. English always came very easily to me because I was an instinctive reader. Reading the set text wasn't light work, and writing essays on them came too easily to me. With history, you have to obviously deal with, somewhat more difficult concepts and so on. So I think perhaps I must have unconsciously felt that doing English would have been too much of an easy ride. But the main reason was a simple one. My father was professor and head of the Department of English, and no way was I going to be an English major student in a department that my father headed, and I don't think he would have wanted that either. So that actually clinched my decision to do history. I was extraordinarily lucky because in my time at Mona, all the great figures of Caribbean history were active and teaching. So I was taught by Elsa Guevara, whose illness had already begun, but the year that she lectured to us in West Indian history, she was certainly an excellent lecturer. Roy Auger taught me, Douglas Hall taught me, Keith Lawrence taught me, and others too. So I was lucky to be taught by some of the, the major figures of Caribbean history of that generation. It was very, very stimulating.
Do you have any memories, almost epiphanic, perhaps, something stay in your mind about a moment when you begin to grasp something about the thing you are doing?
I can't remember a sort of single moment. I remember my first year, I didn't feel I was making much progress. Of course, my first year was difficult from all kinds of points of view. I was a young English girl adjusting. In Mary Seacole Hall, at first I could barely understand anything anybody told me. And these were middle-class children for the great majority, but even a middle-class Jamaican girl speaking fast is not particularly understandable to a young English girl who had had no interaction whatsoever with West Indians or any black people of any kind back in Exeter or Edinburgh. So I was adjusting to that. I was adjusting to the strange social situation of being in a racial minority. It's a new situation. I'm one of the very, very few white undergraduates on campus. There were a few more postgrad, but very, very few white undergrads on campus. More than once, I was approached by young men who were either white or light-colored or Chinese, who clearly thought that it would be nice to have a white girlfriend or an English girlfriend. And I did go out with a couple of them. They were mostly terribly boring, and I think I was bright enough to understand that what they valued in me was my Englishness and my whiteness and not any wonderful qualities of my own personality. So I was adjusting to all kinds of things. But also because in those days, year one special honors history was mostly European history, which I actually knew quite a lot about because I'd done a lot of that in school. So it wasn't particularly fresh or new to me. But my year two and year three was completely different. I was introduced to Caribbean history, and you could not be introduced by anyone better than Elsa Guevara. Her lecture course was just wonderful, absolutely sensational. I mean, people came and listened to it who were not registered in her course. She lectured so...
Everyone says it's
yes,
about
there's no question
Elsa's,
about it.
but tell me what it is about, or tell us what it is.
She wasn't flamboyant. There was nothing theatrical in her delivery. And you could tell she was a true scholar, but her delivery was very fluent and very self-confident. She illustrated all her points with telling anecdotes or quotations, contemporary quotations. And also, her delivery was excellent. Her command of the subject was clear even to little second-year undergraduates. But also I think it was the newness of it. I did her course in 64, 65. I sometimes marvel at how Elsa did it in 64, 65. When I look at our reading list now, and I mentally check off, but what had been published in 64? Virtually nothing, virtually nothing. She constructed a year-long, we weren't semesterized, a year-long course in Caribbean history from a bibliography, a reading list, which might be perhaps 1/10 of the reading lists we now can routinely work up. Or maybe less. So the newness of it was very exciting. I wasn't West Indian, but I had been around long enough to appreciate the newness of it. So that was part of it. But I had other excellent lectures too. So in year two and in year three, I felt a sense of excitement that I was doing something new, not only Caribbean history. Douglas Hall taught us Latin American history. I don't think he knew very much about it, but Douglas Hall being Douglas Hall, he was wonderful to listen to. Roy Auger was a tutor. A man who you might not have known, David Brereton, an Englishman who was in Jamaica for years.
Yeah, and I have a book by him.
He taught us, and various other people. So I can't recall one specific moment, but certainly as I moved through years 2 and 3, I felt a sense of excitement at what I was learning and the kinds of, the sense that you were really at a pioneer phase as far as Caribbean history was concerned.
What I'm getting from you, though, is this insider-outsider experience,
Absolutely.
which I think, and I want to bring that back when we talk about race relations in colonial Trinidad, because you are beginning to have an affinity, if you like, for Jamaica, the subject that you are doing, but you're also experiencing it as still a relatively newcomer, and being English and white.
Yeah.
And if I'm to go on your anecdotes about the young men who tried a thing with you, clearly you were also being to understand race and gender relations, you know, the nuances of it. So you chose the discipline of history, and therefore you did history as a undergraduate.
Yeah.
And but you have also done your postgraduate. Where did you move from in terms of?
Okay, well, the next great leap in my life was that, like so many people, I fell in love with a classmate who was Trinidadian, Ashton, and we got married, and I came to live in Trinidad.